Greetings and salutations, young Drew believers. All right, one last major ethical theory. This is the new kid on the block, so to speak. This is uh, variously known as the ethics of care or feminist care ethics. So you'll need some background. Well, you always need background to understand what's going on in philosophy, but um, this theory is actually born out of theories of childhood psychological development. So, for you psychology majors, you might be familiar with the name Lawrence Kohlberg. Kohlberg was a uh, psychology professor, uh, actively researching 50s, 60s, 70s. He's doing his work, and what he's really interested to know is what child ethical development uh, looks like. In other words, how do children develop ethically speaking, morally speaking? So he studied a range of children, both genders, all races, for about 30, 35 years. And he used this thought experiment to help frame his ideas as a test to see how children actually develop morally. And so this thought experiment he thought up is known as Heinz dilemma. And the story goes that there's a man and a wife. They live in a remote town, a rural town in a more or less rural state. His name's Heinz, and his wife develops a very rare disease that requires a very specific medication to treat. There's a pharmacist in town, but the problem is the pharmacist um, he demands $2,000 per bottle for this medicine, and Heinz has only half of that. So he goes to the pharmacist. He says, "Look, I've got half of the money for the medication. Can I just pay off the rest?" Pharmacist says, "No, I've got to have all the money up front or no deal." So Heinz goes home that night and he sees his wife, is in distress. He knows she needs the medicine desperately. So he considers breaking into the pharmacy after hours and stealing the drug. So Kohlberg posed this question to thousands of little boys and little girls over the years, right? And now, before we get to the answers, which are really telling, we have to talk about Kohlberg's 6 stages of moral development. So the first stage of moral development is obeying authority and avoiding punishment. Don't get caught with your hand in the cookie jar kind of thing. Two, satisfying one's own desires and letting others do the same through fair exchanges. That's the first moral lesson you learn. We talked about that yesterday, how to share. Three, cultivating one's relationships and performing the duties of one's social roles. You go out to school, you good boy, good girl, that kind of thing, study hard. Four, obeying the law and maintaining the welfare of the group, being a good citizen. Upholding the basic rights and values of one's society. That's a more developed version. And stage six, which in Kohlberg's view, very, very few people ever reach. And that's abiding by abstract, universal moral principles. All right, so Kohlberg, as I noted, he posed Heinz dilemma to thousands of children over the years. Well, he recorded two responses that he thought were very, very telling. They were typical of the responses he got from little boys and little girls. So the first one comes to us from an 11-year-old boy named Jake. And again, should Heinz steal the drug? Jake responds, no. And Kohlberg asks, why not? Well, for one thing, a human life is worth more than money, and if the pharmacist only makes $1,000, he's still going to live, but if Heinz doesn't steal the drug, his wife's going to die. And then Kohlberg asks, why is life worth more than money? And little Jake responds, because the pharmacist can get $1,000 later from rich people with cancer, but Heinz can't get his wife back again. And Kohlberg again, why not? And Jake responds, because people are all different, and so you couldn't get Heinz's wife again. So then he asked Amy, who was also 11, and Amy saw the matter differently. And compared to Jake's responses, her responses seem a little hesitant, right? And she says, well, I don't think so. I don't think he should break into the pharmacy and steal drug. I think there might be other ways besides stealing it. Like if he could borrow the money or make a loan or something like that, but he really shouldn't steal the drug. But his wife shouldn't die either. If he stole the drug, he might save his wife, but if he did, he might have to go to jail and his wife might get sick again and he couldn't get more of the drug and it might not be good. So they should really just talk it out and find some other way to make the money. So, what did Kohlberg conclude as a result of all this research? He concluded that little Amy and all the other little girls that he interviewed are morally stunted compared to their little boy counterparts, right? Whereas Jake seemed to be operating at level 4, maybe even 5, right? He concluded that Amy was stuck at level 3. And most girls are like that. Little girls just develop, morally speaking, at a slower rate than do little boys. Well, fast forward to the late 70s. Kohlberg has a graduate student. He's her dissertation advisor. Her name's Carol Gilligan. And when Gilligan graduates, she publishes a book in 1982 called In a Different Voice. And what Gilligan does in that book is she challenges Kohlberg's assessment. She argues that far from being morally stunted, what little Amy and what all little girls that age are doing, and what is typical of women in general, is they're responding in a characteristically feminine way. So let's set some context here. Gilligan argues that the characteristic masculine virtues are impersonal. That's not to say bad, they're just impersonal. Men historically have worked outside of the home. Most of their social interactions have been outside the home, in fields like business, law, politics. So what kind of virtues do you need for success in these fields? Well, you need virtues that don't involve deep relationships with people, but do involve sussing out what enables you to be successful in fields like business, law, politics. So the characteristic masculine virtues are impersonal and deal with large groups of people. And the characteristic masculine virtue on Gilligan's view is justice. The other virtues that men emphasize are impartiality, fairness, honesty, right? Now, you contrast that with women's historical situation. The bulk of women's historical situation in almost any culture have always been inside the home. And doing what? Raising children and maintaining the family. What kind of virtues do you need? Well, again, here you're dealing with fewer relationships, but much deeper, much more intimate relationships. So on a feminist care ethicist view, right, and this theory was later developed a bit more by two women philosophers, Annette Beyer and Virginia Held. On Beyer's view, the characteristic feminine virtue is trust. Trust, on Beyer's view, is the cornerstone of all ethics, right? Because she notes most of our relationships through our lives involve power differentials. When you're a kid, you're in a relationship where your parents have more power. When you're employed, your employer has more power. When you're in college, your professor has more power. So the upshot is that the party with less power in a relationship must invariably devote more trust to the relationship. Trust then becomes essential to any successful ethical relationship. So women respond in a characteristically feminine way. Now, this, of course, has led to thousands of studies since 1982. Is there really a difference, morally speaking, between the way men think and the way women think? Well, what the research shows is that men are only slightly more concerned with justice, and women are only slightly more concerned with care and intimacy than men are. And this shouldn't surprise us, because if it really were the case that men and women were speaking a completely different language, so to speak, with respect to morality, we would never, ever be able to reach moral consensus. But obviously we do. Of course, this raises another question. Are these differences natural? That is to say, are they biological, or are they a result of societal forces? And the consensus in the relationship seems to be it's a little bit of both, right? And in fact, that's true of just about every characteristic that human beings have. We are never entirely the product of biology, nor are we solely the product of acculturation. It's always a blend of both. So what advantages confer to the moral thinker from this theory? Well, one really interesting thing about care ethics is that the care ethicists have shown, while it's generally a good idea to be impartial and objective with respect to morality, you can't always be that way. So imagine, if you will, you're at a beach with your child, and your child's playing in, swimming around in the ocean, and there's a stranger's child. Nobody knows where this child's parents are. Seemingly just came down to the beach of their own accord, right? Both kids start to drown. Both children are equidistant from you. You can only save one. Whom are you going to save? And obviously, everybody says, "Well, I'd save my child." And you can imagine the response by the community if say someone saved a stranger's child, let their child die, and when they asked why, they said, "Well, morality demands we be impartial," right? So of course, you would save your child. Why? Because you've spent a lifetime with that child, albeit 5, 6 years, 7 years, whatever it is. But still, you have an intimate, caring relationship with your child. The relationship should matter more to you. And that's a brilliant insight on behalf of the feminist care ethicist, right? Our personal relationships, our deep, committed, intimate relationships do and should matter to us, and they should be of moral import to us, right? The other advantage of this theory is this: historically, no matter where it appears in the world, the bulk of writing on ethics has been done by men. So when you begin to take seriously the contribution that women have to make to this debate, what becomes evident is that our understanding of morality is going to be rounded out. We're going to have a more complete picture in the end.